The briefing lasted 11 minutes and told me nothing I did not already know. We were losing. Not dramatically, not in the way that makes historians write long chapters. We were losing the way water loses a fight with a drain, slowly, consistently, in one direction only. The Vehari separatist front had pushed the coalition back 40 kilometers in 3 weeks, and the Allied command had responded by doing what Allied command always does when things go wrong. They gave the job to the humans. My name is Dara Vasquez, Sergeant, Combat Medic, 3rd Coalition Auxiliary. I have been in this war for 2 years, 4 months, and somewhere around 16 days, though I stopped counting days after the first 6 months because counting made the number real, and the number was not something I wanted to be real. I am from a small town outside San Antonio, Texas, where my grandmother still grows tomatoes and does not entirely understand what I do for work. I have a scar above my left eyebrow from a piece of shrapnel that came from a weapon that was not even aimed at me. I have kept 23 soldiers alive in the field who had no reasonable expectation of staying that way. None of that mattered to the coalition command. What mattered to them was that I was human, which meant I was expendable in the specific, deniable way that makes generals sleep at night. Lieutenant Colonel Harvin Krethali, 7 feet tall, the kind of calm that looks like arrogance until you realize it is just indifference, pulled up the mission assignment on the central display like he was reading a grocery list. Escort duty. 1 VIP. From Outpost Relay 9 to the ceasefire summit at Ven Station, through 40 kilometers of active contested territory where 3 other escort attempts had already failed. The previous teams, I asked. Harvin looked at me the way you look at a chair that has asked a question. Reassigned. Reassigned. That was the word. I filed it next to 11 other words that meant the same thing and moved on. There were 6 of us. Me, Corporal Pete Adler, 22, from Ohio, who laughed too loud and too often and was the best shot I had ever seen with a secondary range rifle. Private Cora Mills, 19, on her first deployment, who had not yet learned to sleep through artillery. Specialist Gant Rowe, 31, former cargo pilot, now ground infantry because his ship had been shot down over Relay 4, and the coalition had needed warm bodies more than they had needed to reassign him properly. And 2 Krethali soldiers whose names I could not pronounce correctly, who had been assigned to us the way furniture gets assigned to a room, placed there, not chosen. We were told the VIP was a diplomatic asset, high value, irreplaceable. The summit depended on her presence. We were not told who she was until the transport bay doors opened at Relay 9, and she walked in. I have seen a lot in 2 years. I have seen weapons that rewrite the rules of what a body can survive. I have seen alien species that make the human nervous system do things it was not designed to do. I thought I was past being surprised. I was not past this. She was Vehari. The enemy species. Not the separatists specifically. The Vehari were not a monolith. They never had been, which was why there was a war in the first place. But she was Vehari in the bone-deep way, in the bioluminescent way, in the way that made the air around her feel like it had been rearranged to accommodate her presence. Tall. Silver blue, the light under her skin moving like slow water. She moved the way gravity was something she was considering rather than obeying. The kind of presence that makes your brain do something embarrassing before your better judgment can intervene. I noted it, cataloged it, filed it under not relevant. She had 2 Vehari attendants who stood at angles that were clearly defensive without looking obviously defensive, and a coalition intelligence officer named Rafe Cole, who had the expression of a man who had been given a job he did not want and was performing it with grim professionalism. Cole gave us the actual briefing in a flat, fast voice. Princess Sale, 3rd heir to the Vehari Central Accord, the only member of the royal line who had publicly called for the war to end. The separatist hardliners wanted her dead for that. Her own government wanted her contained. The coalition wanted her at that summit because she was the only voice in the entire conflict that both sides might actually listen to. Might. Nobody was confident. Pete leaned close to me and said, very quietly, "We are absolutely going to die." I said, "Not today, stop talking." He stopped. Sale had been speaking with the intelligence officer in low tones. Then she turned. She looked across the transport bay with those Vihari eyes, pale gold, no pupil that I could detect, the kind of gaze that feels like being read rather than seen, and she passed over Harvin, passed over Cole, passed over the Krathali soldiers and looked directly at me. She held it for 3 full seconds. Then she said in perfect English with no accent at all, "You stay close." Not a question, not a request, the tone of someone stating a fact that has not happened yet. Every person in the bay looked at me. I had been called a lot of things in this war: useful, disposable, acceptable losses, logistics muscle. I had been called brave once by a Krathali field commander who then immediately sent my unit into a position with no cover and watched from a ridge. No one had ever looked at me the way she just did and said those words in that voice. I said, "Yes, ma'am." She turned away and continued her conversation with Cole. Pete was staring at me. Cora was staring at me. Gant was staring at the ceiling with the focused expression of a man pretending he had heard nothing. I checked my medical kit, counted supplies, made sure everything was where it was supposed to be. I did not think about those 3 seconds. I thought about them for the rest of the night. We rolled out at 400 when the dark was still thick and the thermal scanners had a decent chance of being worth something. The first 20 kilometers were tense in the specific way that contested territory is always tense, not because things are happening, but because things might happen and your body does not know the difference. Every shadow is a threat assessment. Every sound is a calculation. You stop seeing the landscape and start seeing angles, distances, positions. 40 kilometers. 11 hours. 3 ambushes. The first one hit at the river crossing, and it was over fast because Pete was Pete, and because Gant, it turned out, had been a cargo pilot who had also done a significant amount of things that cargo pilots are not officially supposed to know how to do. The second ambush was worse. Slower. We lost one of the Krathali soldiers, not dead, but a wound that took him out of function, and I worked on him in a ditch for 6 minutes while the firefight moved around us, and Cora stood over me with her weapon up in her hands, shaking in a way that I pretended not to see. He lived. I told him he was going to be fine before I was certain he was going to be fine, which is the job. Through all of it, Sale moved through the chaos like she was walking through a room that had nothing to do with her. Not careless, not oblivious, more like the danger understood her presence and was uncertain what to do about it. I noticed that, filed it. Between the second and third ambush, she fell into step beside me. We walked in silence for a while, the kind of silence that is not uncomfortable but is charged, like the air before a storm that has not decided what it wants to be yet. Then she said, still looking ahead, "You told the Krathali soldier he would survive before you had assessed his full injuries." I kept walking, yes. Was that a lie? It was a projection, based on what I could see and what I know about that wound type. It turned out to be accurate. And if it had not been accurate? I thought about that for half a second. He still needed to believe it, so I still would have said it. Another silence, shorter. "Interesting," she said, like she was writing something down in a language I could not read. The third ambush came an hour later and was the worst of the 3. And by the time it was over, I had blood on both sleeves that was not mine, and the sun was coming up over relay terrain that looked like it had been chewed and spat out. Gant pulled up the coordinates. Ven Station, still 20 kilometers. We kept moving. That evening, at the forward relay point where we stopped to regroup and wait for the extraction window, I found a quiet wall and sat against it and let myself be tired for approximately 4 minutes, which is all I allow. Sale sat down 3 feet away from me, close for a Vihari. They were not a close proximity species by instinct. She did not say anything. I did not say anything. The quiet between us was different from the earlier quiet, easier, like something had been established that did not need words to maintain it. I did not know what to do with that, so I checked my medical kit again. Everything was where it was supposed to be. It always is. Nobody slept well at the relay point. The structure was half a roof and 3 walls, and the wind came through the missing 4th wall with the focused commitment of something that had been personally offended by warmth. Cora sat with her back against a support beam and stared at the middle distance the way soldiers do when they are running calculations that have nothing to do with tactics. Pete cleaned his rifle for the 3rd time, which was not about the rifle. Gant slept, because Gant had the remarkable ability to sleep anywhere under any conditions, which I had long since decided was either a gift or evidence of a personality I did not fully understand. I did not sleep. I watched the approaches and I watched Sale. She sat slightly apart from everyone, her 2 attendants positioned at angles that were still, even at rest, clearly protective. The bioluminescence under her skin had dimmed to something low and slow in the dark, like embers rather than flame, and in that light she looked less otherworldly and more tired. Just tired. The kind of tired that has nothing to do with the body. She caught me watching. I did not look away fast enough to pretend I had not been. She did not look away at all. We stayed like that for 3 seconds. The second time she had held my gaze past the point where most people look for an exit, and then she turned back to whatever she was reading on her data slate. I went back to watching the approaches. My heart was doing something I declined to acknowledge. We moved again before dawn. The second day of transit was harder than the first in the way that the second day of anything difficult is harder, not because the difficulty increases, but because the body has spent its first day adrenaline, and now has to operate on something cheaper and less reliable. The terrain was broken and uneven, old battlefield ground that had been contested and released and contested again so many times that it no longer looked like anything that had once been landscape. It looked like argument, like the land itself had been interrupted mid-sentence and never allowed to finish. The first firefight of the second day came at 8:30. At a narrow pass between 2 ridge formations that the tactical map had labeled as clear. Tactical maps are wrong with a frequency that I have long since stopped finding surprising. They came from the high ground, 6 of them, Vihari separatist fighters in the light armor configuration that meant they were fast, and that meant I needed to worry about the people on my side who were not fast. I pushed Cora behind cover first. She went without argument, which meant she was learning. Gant went left in the low crouch of someone who has been shot at enough times to have developed strong opinions about silhouette reduction. Pete was already returning fire, that eerie stillness settling over him the way it always did when he was working, like the whole rest of his personality had stepped aside for the part of him that was very, very good at this specific terrible thing. 3 of the 6 went down in the first 90 seconds. The other 3 repositioned, which was smart, and then one of them got an angle on Rafe Cole, who was moving in the wrong direction with the focused incorrectness of someone who had spent more time in briefing rooms than in firefights. I moved. Not toward cover, toward Cole. I hit him at the shoulder and we both went sideways behind a broken wall section, and the shot that would have taken him went over us and into the ridge behind. Cole was breathing hard, alive, looked at me with the expression of a man recalibrating several assumptions at once. "Stay down," I said. "Stay behind the wall, do not move toward the open ground again." He stayed. The remaining 3 separatists lasted another 4 minutes, then it was quiet. I came back up into the open and started the check, moving person to person, fast assessment, looking for damage I had missed in the noise. Pete had a graze on his left forearm that he had not mentioned. I bandaged it while he reloaded, and he said thanks without interrupting the reload, which is the correct behavior. Gant was fine. The surviving Krethali soldier was fine. Cora had a look on her face I recognized. The first-time look. The look of someone whose brain is reorganizing its understanding of what the world is capable of producing in an afternoon. I put a hand on her shoulder for 2 seconds. Not long, just long enough to interrupt the spiral. She nodded, came back. I turned. Sale was standing 4 feet from me. She was watching my hands, the hands I had used on Pete's arm, on Cora's shoulder, on Cole's position. Watching them the way you watch something that is doing work you have never seen done before. Not the violence part, the other part. The stitching together part, the staying part. Her attendants were looking at me too, but differently, assessing, cautious. Sale's expression was nothing like cautious. I said, "Are you injured?" She said, "No." "Then we need to keep moving." She fell into step beside me again. Same position as the day before, 3 feet of space between us. 2 hours later, she was handing me instruments in a firefight, and I still had not asked her how she knew which ones I needed. The Krethali soldier, the one from the previous day, the one I had worked on in the ditch, had reopened the wound, not badly, but enough that it needed attention in a hurry. We were pinned behind an overturned transport vehicle, the firefight going on 15 meters to our left, and I was working with both hands and the specific focus tunnel that good field medicine requires where the rest of the world stops existing. Sale crouched beside me. I said without looking up, "I need the compression seal from the right pocket of my kit." She had it in my hand before I finished the sentence. Not her own equipment, mine, from a kit she had no reason to know the layout of. 2 minutes later, irrigation syringe. Already there. I worked, she assisted. Gant kept the position. The Krethali soldier stayed alive, which was the only metric that mattered. When it was done, I sat back on my heels for a moment and looked at her. "How do you know my kit?" She met my eyes. "I have been watching you work since Relay 9. She said it plainly. The way you say a thing that is simply true and requires no decoration, no apology, no qualification. Something in my chest moved. I treated it as a non-emergency and stood up. "Good," I said. "Keep watching, you're useful." A pause. Then, very quietly, one of her attendants said something to her in Vihari. My translator gave me, "She approved of you." I did not ask which of us the attendant meant. We hit the worst terrain of the entire transit in the late afternoon, a stretch of open ground between 2 destroyed settlements where there was no cover worth the name, and the distance to the other side was long enough to feel personal. Harvin had flagged it on the route map. We had no choice but to cross it. Halfway across, Sale moved up beside me again. We were moving fast, no conversation. The open ground doing what open ground does to the nervous system, and she matched my pace without effort despite the terrain, which was not built for her gait. She said, voice low, barely above the wind, "You are afraid." I said, "Yes." "And yet you are moving." That is generally how I handle being afraid. Another of those silences that has weight to it. She was looking ahead. I could see her processing something in the way that reads on Vihari faces, not as thought but as stillness, a very complete, very deliberate stillness. "In our language," she said, "there are several words for courage. I will not list them, but none of them mean what you are doing." I said, "What am I doing?" She did not answer immediately. We reached the far side, the covered ground. Gant exhaled audibly, which was the closest he got to expressing relief. Sale said, "I am still determining the translation." She walked ahead to join her attendants. I watched her go for approximately 1 second. 1 second is the ration I allowed myself. Pete appeared at my shoulder. He said nothing for a moment, then, She's something, huh? I said, eyes forward, Adler. He smiled. It was the smile of someone who knows they are right and is too polite to press it. We made camp that night in a derelict station building with 3 intact walls and better roof coverage than the previous night, which felt like luxury by this point. Gant found something that functioned as a heating unit. Cora ate without the faraway look, which was progress. Rafe Cole cleaned his sidearm and avoided my eyes, which was the appropriate response to owing someone your life and not knowing how to say it. Sale sat across the room from me. She had her data slate. She was working or appearing to work. Her attendants were asleep. Every few minutes I noticed, without meaning to notice, that she was not looking at the data slate. She was looking at me. The third time I caught it, I did not look away, neither did she. The heating unit made a low sound. The wind worked at the gaps in the walls. Outside, the war waited with the patience of something that had all the time in the world. I pulled my kid into my lap and counted supplies by feel without looking down. Everything was where it was supposed to be. It always is. But the room felt smaller than it had before, and I had the distinct, inconvenient, impossible to file away feeling that the 40 kilometers between Relay 9 and Venn Station were almost gone, and that I was not entirely sure what happened after that. The derelict station had, at some point before the war, been a transit hub. You could still see the shape of it, the wide central floor where people had moved between connections, the high ceiling that had been designed to feel open, the row of windows along the eastern wall, most of them blown out but the frames still standing like empty picture borders looking out at nothing good. We had 16 hours before the extraction window. 16 hours is a long time to be still, when stillness is not something you are used to. I cleaned every instrument in my kit. Twice. Then I made Cora walk me through her field assessment procedure, while I corrected the 4 things she was still doing wrong in a way that would eventually matter. Then I checked the building's perimeter with Gant, who had the particular silence of someone who has decided to focus entirely on the task in front of him, and finds this deeply relieving. By hour 4, I had run out of things that needed doing. I was sitting against the eastern wall, a cup of something the station's emergency stores called coffee. And it was not coffee. It was something that had been near coffee at some point and absorbed a distant memory of it, when Sale sat down beside me. Not 3 feet away this time. Close enough that I could hear the low, very quiet sound the bioluminescence made. I had not known it made a sound until that moment. It was like a signal too low to be music, but too deliberate to be noise. She had her own cup of the not coffee. She held it with both hands and looked at it for a moment. "It is very bad," she said. "Yes. And yet you are drinking it." "It is warm," I said. "That is the only standard I am applying right now." She took a sip. The expression on her face was worth something. I said, "You don't have to drink it." She took another sip. "I am determining whether the warmth compensates for everything else." Verdict. She considered, marginally. We sat with the bad not coffee and the low sound of her presence and the wind doing its work at the window frames, and for a while neither of us said anything. It was the easiest quiet I had been in since before this war started. I did not examine that. I just let it be what it was. Then she said, "Can I ask you something?" I said yes. "Why did you enter this conflict? Humans were not party to the original dispute. You were not threatened. The coalition recruited your species as support personnel, not combatants. And yet you are here in this role, choosing the most dangerous position in every situation." I thought about that for a moment. Not because I did not have an answer, but because I wanted to give her the real one rather than the one that sounds better. "I am a medic," I said. "My function is to keep people alive who would otherwise not stay that way. The location of the work is secondary." "But you chose a combat posting." The people who need a medic most are in combat postings. She looked at me. Then she said, "Our intelligence service has a file on human behavioral patterns in warfare. They have been building it for 40 years. I waited. "The file is classified at the highest level," she said. "I have access to it because of my position, and because I requested it specifically 2 years ago, when the Coalition first assigned human units to active positions." "What does it say?" She set down the cup on the floor between us. Her hands folded in her lap with a precision that was not tension, but was close to it, the precision of someone choosing their words the way you choose footing on bad ground. "It says that humans perform in ways that cannot be modeled," she said. "The analysts have tried 17 different frameworks. None of them produce accurate predictions. Every other species in the conflict has a behavioral ceiling, a threshold of loss or pressure beyond which they withdraw, reorganize, or collapse. Humans do not behave this way." I said nothing. "The Krethali withdraw when casualties reach 12% of a unit," she continued. "The Vethani reorganize when command structure is disrupted more than 30%. Even our own species, the Vehari, have documented thresholds. We understand loss. We calculate when loss exceeds the value of continuation and we stop." The wind found a gap in the wall and came through at a new angle. "Humans do not stop," she said. "The analysts cannot find the threshold. They have looked for it. They have run the data from 63 separate engagements involving human units. The threshold does not appear." She paused. "This is very troubling to military analysts." I made a small sound that was almost a laugh. "I can imagine." "What they decided," she said, "after many years and many arguments is that it is not a tactical quality. It is not training. It is something prior to training, something that is already in the human response before any military conditioning is applied." She looked at me directly. "You are afraid. That is documented and measurable and undeniable, and you continue anyway, and you do not find this remarkable." I looked at the cup on the floor, the bad not coffee, steam still coming off it in a thin line. "We have a word for it," she said. "In Vehari. The analysts coined it 40 years ago when they first started seeing the pattern. They called it Vethkai." My translator processed it, gave me 3 words. "Those who continue." I turned the phrase over. "That is not a compliment in the context you're describing. It sounds more like a notation." "It was a notation," she said. "At first." A pause. "I'm not sure it is only that anymore." I did not respond to that. Not because I had nothing to say, but because the thing I had to say was not something I was prepared to say in that room with the wind and the bad coffee, and her sitting that close. I said instead, "Why did you request me specifically?" She had told me at Relay 9 to stay close. Not my rank, not my unit, me. By the time we reached the relay point, she had clearly already known who I was before she walked into that transport bay. She was quiet for a moment. The bioluminescence did its slow movement. Then she said, "Before this assignment, I reviewed the after-action reports of all available human medical personnel with active combat postings. I was looking for a specific quality." A pause. "I found it in your reports." "What quality?" She said, "Every other medic in the reports showed the same pattern. They moved toward the wounded when the immediate threat had reduced to an acceptable level. Not when it was safe, but when it was acceptable." She looked at me. "Your reports showed a different pattern. You moved toward the wounded before the acceptable level, before any level." I said, "That is a criticism of my tactical judgment." "Yes," she said, "it is also why I chose you." The statement sat there in the space between us. I wanted to find something to look at that was not her face. The cups, the window frames, the crack running up the far wall in a long, decisive line. I looked at the crack for several seconds. Then I said, "You said the word meant those who continue, but you looked like you were going to say something else." Another pause, longer than the others. The original translation is accurate, she said, but there is a secondary reading, older. The analysts used the first reading because it was more precise for their purposes. She stopped. I waited. The older meaning, she said, is closer to those who do not calculate the cost before moving toward the one who needs them. The heating unit made its low sound. I did not say anything. She did not say anything. Outside, the war went on doing what the war does, with complete indifference to anything happening in that room. And in that room, something was happening that I had no framework for, and was not going to try to build one on 16 hours of bad not coffee in a building with most of its windows gone. I stood up. We should sleep, I said. We have a long day tomorrow. She looked up at me, gold eyes, no readable pupil, the slow light underneath. Yes, she said, we do. I went to my spot against the wall and lay down, and did not sleep for a long time. I ran through my kit inventory in my head, every item, every position. Everything was where it was supposed to be. I stayed on that thought for an hour before I finally went under, and even then the last thing my brain produced before sleep was not tactics or routes or threat assessments. It was the sound of her saying those who do not calculate the cost. And the fact that she had said it to me like it was a thing she had been waiting to say for a long time. The extraction window closed. We got the message at 3:40, command signal, cold and official, no explanation beyond a 3-digit code that Cole translated with a flat voice and a face that gave nothing away. The route to Venn Station was compromised. A hardliner strike force had moved into the valley approach overnight, 600 strong, and the coalition had made the calculation. The kind of calculation that coalition command makes with a smoothness that I have always found deeply unnerving, that the risk to the summit could not be justified. Summit suspended. VIP to hold position pending new routing assessment. Which in the language of coalition command meant, we are not coming. Cole set down his communicator. He did not look at anyone for a moment. Then he looked at Sale. She had been awake when the message came. I was not surprised. I was not sure she had slept. She read the message summary on Cole's data slate. She read it once. Her expression did not change in any way I could measure. Then she handed the data slate back to Cole and said, "How large is the strike force in the valley?" Cole said 600, maybe more, armed for a ground push. She said, "And the summit is at Venn Station. How far from the valley exit?" 4 kilometers from the mouth of the valley to the station perimeter. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I am going to walk to the summit." Cole opened his mouth. She said, "On foot, through the valley today." The silence in the room was the kind that happens when several people are processing a statement that does not fit into any of their existing categories. Pete said very quietly to me, "Did she say 600? I said nothing. Cole started talking. Professional, precise, escalating the security risk, the tactical reality, the coalition's assessment, the safety protocols. He was not wrong about any of it, not one word. He laid out every reason in order, and his voice was controlled, and it was the voice of a man who was absolutely correct and knew with some part of himself that it was not going to matter. Sale listened. She let him finish. Then she said, "The war has continued because both sides are waiting for someone to move first. Both sides believe the other will take the movement as weakness and use it. They are locked in the same position." She looked at Cole. "I can move first. That is what I am." Cole said, "With respect, if they take you in that valley, the summit becomes irrelevant and the war continues anyway." She said, "Then I will not allow them to take me." She said it simply, not with arrogance, not with the heat of someone being brave for an audience, with the flat certainty of someone reading a weather report for a day that has already happened. Cole looked at me. I do not know why he looked at me. Maybe because I was the ranking human. Maybe because he had a sense already of something that I had not yet put into words. I said, "How far to the valley entrance?" Cole said, 3 kilometers north. I picked up my kit. Then we should leave soon. The light will be better for approach in about 40 minutes. Cora said, "We're going." I said, "We are going." Pete was already checking his rifle. He had a smile that had no business being as calm as it was. Gant stood up without comment. He had the look of a man who had decided, at some prior point, to simply do whatever Dara Vasquez was doing until told otherwise, which I had always found to be a sound policy. The surviving Krethali soldier stood up. I looked at him, his wound, the repair I had done in that ditch. He met my eyes and his expression said, "I know what you are thinking and I am not staying here." I did not argue, he had earned the right. We left at 4:20 under a sky that was moving from black to the color of old bruises. The valley was long and flat and wrong in the way that places feel wrong when too many people have been in them with bad intentions. The ground was churned and marked, and the settlement on the western edge was empty in the specific way that buildings are empty when the people who left them did not plan to leave. Smoke somewhere ahead, old smoke, the kind that has been hanging for days. The strike force was positioned across the valley in a line that stretched from ridge to ridge. I could see them clearly as we came down the approach, 600, Cole had said, and Cole was not wrong. Armored, heavy weapons on the flanks. The formation of a force that was not expecting to need to move because the thing they were waiting for was going to come to them. We stopped at the edge of their visibility range. Our group, 8 people. Their group, 600. I checked the math. The math was not good. The math was, in fact, the worst math I had done in 2 years. Pete said, "So, hypothetically, what's the plan?" Sale stepped forward. She stepped past Cole, past me, past the position where cover was still possible. She walked out into the open ground between our position and their line, and she kept walking, alone, no weapon, her 2 attendants trailing 6 steps behind. The bioluminescence, she had turned it up. I did not know it could be turned up the way a person turns up a light, but she had done it, and she was lit from within in a way that the early morning dark made absolute, made impossible to miss, made into the only thing in the landscape that your eye could find or follow or hold. She walked like the ground owed her something. Cole said, "She'll be killed." I said no. I stepped forward. Not heroically. My boot found a broken piece of ground and I staggered, caught myself, kept moving. My weapon was down. I did not raise it. I kept my hands where they could be seen. My heart was doing the thing it does when the math is bad and the body knows it and keeps going anyway. Behind me, footsteps. Pete, then Cora, then Gant, then Cole after a 2-second pause that I will always respect him for working through. Then the Krethali soldier, moving carefully on his repaired wound with the expression of a man who has made his peace. 8 people walking into the open ground in front of 600. The strike force saw us. They did not fire. I think it was her. I think it was the light of her and the way she moved and something old in the Vihari biology that the war had buried but not killed. Something that recognized her, recognized what she represented, recognized that the thing walking toward them in the early morning dark was not an enemy or a target, but something prior to those categories. I think it was also us. 8 humans walking toward 600 with their hands where they could be seen, and their weapons down and no flag, no signal, no tactic. Just forward motion. Just the old, unremarkable, impossible-to-model fact of continuing. I was afraid. I want to be clear about that. I was afraid in the precise, measurable, biochemical way that Sale had described in that station. My body was producing every signal it had for danger, and my legs kept moving and my hands stayed down and my eyes stayed forward. A commander stepped out of the strike force line, Vihari, senior rank, the markings visible even at distance. He raised his weapon. He aimed it at Sale. I moved. I am not going to describe it as something other than what it was. I did not calculate. I did not assess the tactical situation and determine the optimal response. My brain produced one clear output. She is the target and I am between the positions, and my body closed the distance and I stepped in front of her. I was between the weapon and Sale. I was looking at the commander across that open ground. He was looking at me. My weapon was down. My hands were visible. My face was, I do not know what my face was doing. I was not thinking about my face. I was thinking about the distance and the sight line and the fact that my feet were planted and I was not moving. This is the thing I cannot fully explain, and do not try to. He did not fire. He stood there with the weapon raised and he looked at me, and I looked at him, and something passed between us that I do not have language for, some transaction that had nothing to do with tactics or strategy, or the 400 years of war theory that had produced us both. He looked at a human soldier standing in the open with her weapon down, and her hands visible, and the complete absence of any sign that she was going to move. And something in his calculation broke. Not collapsed, not surrendered. Broke, the way a model breaks when the data it is given does not fit any of its variables. He had a framework for courage. He had a framework for sacrifice. He did not have a framework for this, for the specific quality of a person who is afraid down to the bone and will not step back, not because she has decided to be brave, but because moving backward is simply not a thing she knows how to do. The weapon came down. Slowly, like he was surprised by his own hands. The line behind him did not move. Sale stepped up beside me. Her shoulder was an inch from my shoulder. I could feel the warmth of the light under her skin. She said something in Vihari, to the commander, to the line, to all of them, something I heard, but that my translator took 4 seconds to process. 4 seconds in which the entire valley was as quiet as anything I have ever stood in. The translation came through as, "The war ends when we decide it ends. I have decided." And then quieter, meant for only me in English, without turning her head. "Thank you." I said nothing. We stood in the early morning light, the 8 of us and the 600, and the war held its breath, and I breathed with it. One step, then another. Forward. Ven Station was not what I had expected. I had built it up in my head across 40 kilometers and 2 days of bad terrain into something significant, a place with architecture that matched its purpose, that looked the way a peace summit should look. What it was, in reality, was a mid-range relay facility that had been hastily converted, its cargo bays turned into meeting rooms, its maintenance corridors full of coalition personnel who had the tightly controlled energy of people who had been briefed on what was at stake and were trying not to think about it too hard. We arrived at 8:40. By 900, Sale had been taken into the inner facility by 3 coalition diplomats and a Vihari delegation who had been waiting with the particular tension of people who had long since stopped expecting the thing they were waiting for to actually arrive. By 9:01 I was in a medical bay getting the cut on my left arm, which I had not noticed acquiring, and which Cora had pointed out with the expression of someone reporting a technical failure, cleaned, and dressed by a station medic who kept looking at my kit with the professional curiosity of someone comparing notes. By 9:15, I had run out of things to do. This was the specific problem with being a combat medic outside of combat. The function disappears, and what is left is just a person in a room who is very tired and has too much space in her head and no immediate task to fill it with. Pete found me sitting in a corridor outside the main medical bay, back against the wall, a cup of actual coffee going cold in my hands. He sat down beside me. We did not say anything for a while. Then he said, "That was the bravest thing I have ever seen anyone do." I said, "You stepped out of cover too." He said, I stepped out of cover because you did and it felt wrong to let you do it alone. A pause. That is different. I thought about that, is it? You stepped out first. Nobody asked you to. Nobody was even looking at you. You just went. I looked at the coffee. She was the target. She had 2 trained attendants between her and the threat. I said nothing. Pete said, you stepped out because you could not step out. That is different from what the rest of us did. He said it without judgment, without decoration. Just a thing he had seen and was stating accurately. I drank the coffee. It was cold enough to be unpleasant, and I drank it anyway. He stood up after a while. Get some sleep, Vasquez. He went down the corridor, and I listened to his footsteps, and then it was quiet again, and I had my cold coffee and my tired body, and the long echo of a morning that I had not entirely finished processing. I fell asleep against the wall for approximately 2 hours, which is undignified but was unavoidable, and woke up to find that someone had put a blanket over me, which I did not investigate. Cora passed her field assessment the next day. Clean scores. No hesitations. I told her she had done well and she looked like she did not know what to do with the information, which is the correct response. Gant was reassigned. Coalition Command had apparently discovered that they had a fully trained combat pilot sitting in a ground infantry role and had the decency to feel embarrassed about it. He shook my hand before he left. Firm grip. Short. You're the most straightforwardly competent person I have ever met in any branch of any service, he said. That is the highest compliment I know how to give. I said, safe flying. He said, safe everything, Vasquez. Rafe Cole stopped by the medical bay the morning of his departure. He stood in the doorway for a moment like a man, reviewing his notes. Then he said, at the river crossing, the second day when you pulled me down. I said, yes. He said, I have been in coalition intelligence for 11 years. I want you to know that I am aware, intellectually, that you saved my life. I am also aware that I have not come close to finding the right way to say that. I said, you don't have to find the right way. I know what you mean. He looked at me for a moment, then he nodded, then he left. The summit negotiations ran for 4 days. I was not present for any of them, which was correct and appropriate. I was a sergeant and a medic, and my role in those rooms was nothing. I read medical journals. I helped the station medic reorganize a supply inventory that had been structured in a way that suggested no one who had organized it had ever actually needed to find anything in an emergency. I slept adequately for the first time in weeks. I did not see Sale. I did not expect to see her. She was in rooms that had nothing to do with me, doing work that was the actual point of all of this, and the 40 kilometers and the valley and the morning and the bad light were a completed thing that had served its purpose. I told myself this on the first day. I told myself this more firmly on the second. By the 4th day, I had stopped telling myself anything and was just waiting without admitting I was waiting, which is a more honest state. She found me on the afternoon of the 4th day. Not in the medical bay. In a side corridor on the station's 2nd level, one of the maintenance passages that nobody used much now that the cargo function had been repurposed. I was there because I had been walking. The station was too small for the kind of thinking I was trying to do, and walking in corridors is a poor substitute for actual open ground, but it was what was available. I heard footsteps and turned. She was in what the Vihari wear when they are not in formal or diplomatic dress, lighter fabric, no ornamentation, the bioluminescence at its natural level, which in regular light is subtle enough that you might not notice it immediately. She looked, as she had in the derelict station, less distant than she did in the transport bay, less the idea of a thing and more just herself. She looked tired. Not damaged, not diminished, just tired in the genuine way, the way that appears after you have done something that cost you and have let the cost finally register. She had a cup in each hand. She held one out. I took it. Actual coffee this time, the real kind. I tasted it, then I looked at the cup. Where did you get this? I was informed, she said, that the coalition diplomatic staff had a private supply. I was given a quantity of it after the first day of negotiations, in gratitude for my presence. I believe the intention was for me to consume it during the summit. You saved it. There are 2 cups, she said. I saved 2. I held the cup with both hands and looked at it for a moment. We walked the corridor side by side, the way we had walked 40 kilometers of broken ground, the same distance between us. The station made its sounds around us, ventilation, distant voices, the low hum of systems that do not sleep. She said the ceasefire terms were agreed this morning. I said I heard. The separatist command accepted the framework. Both sides accepted a withdrawal schedule and a monitoring structure. The analysts are giving it a 40% chance of holding for more than 1 year. A pause. I believe it will hold. Why? She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, because both sides agreed to it not from strength but from exhaustion, and because they saw something in that valley that they have not seen before and do not yet have a category for. I said, what did they see? She said, 8 people walking toward 600 with nothing in their hands. I drank my coffee. There are reports, she said, from the hardliner commander who was present, formal after-action reports filed within hours of the event. The Coalition Intelligence Service forwarded copies to me as a courtesy. A pause. I thought you would want to hear what they said. I said, you thought right. She said, the commander's report describes our approach in tactical terms for approximately 2 paragraphs. Then there is a section marked as a supplementary observation, which is irregular. Field commanders do not typically include supplementary observations. She looked at me briefly. He wrote that the human soldier's behavior demonstrated, and this is his precise language, incomprehensible tactical irrationality. Something moved in my chest, the real kind, the involuntary kind. I laughed. Not a polite sound, not a controlled sound. The actual laugh, the one that comes up from somewhere before the filter kicks in, the kind that costs you your composure briefly and you do not entirely mind. She watched me laugh with an expression that was not quite a smile, but was the closest I had seen her come to one. I brought myself back. That is the most human review I have ever received. I thought you would find it accurate, she said. I thought you would find it funny. I found it, she said carefully, interesting, specifically the word incomprehensible. A pause. I have been thinking about that word for 3 days. I looked at her. The hardliners use incomprehensible as a critique, she said, as a notation of failure. The human unit failed to behave in a way that could be modeled or predicted or countered. This is the way military analysis uses the word. She held her cup in both hands. I have been thinking about whether that is the correct use. I waited. Incomprehensible, she said, as in, beyond the models we have built, beyond the frameworks we have used to understand behavior. She turned the cup slowly. I have wondered whether that is a problem of the behavior or a problem of the models. I said, what conclusion have you reached? She looked at me directly. I have concluded, she said, that the models are wrong. The corridor was quiet around us. I said, sail. She said, yes. When we were at the station, the derelict one, you told me that Vethkai has an older meaning. Yes. Those who do not calculate the cost before moving toward the one who needs them, I said. Yes. You told me the analysts used the other translation, the first one. I looked at her. But that was not the translation you were thinking of. She was quiet for a moment. The bioluminescence did its slow thing, its signal that was too deliberate to be noise. No, she said. When did you start using the second one? She held my gaze. Those gold eyes, no readable pupil, the look of being read rather than seen, except that I had spent long enough in proximity to her now to know that it did not feel like being read by something indifferent. It felt like being read by something that cared about the text. She said, "The moment I saw your after-action reports." I looked at my coffee cup. The cup was very ordinary. The corridor was very ordinary. Outside, somewhere in the rooms with the right furniture and the right people, a ceasefire agreement was being formatted into the correct official language, and a war was taking its first breath in a different direction. And in here there was a corridor and 2 cups of actual coffee, and 6 days of terrain between the place where she had said stay close and the place where we were standing. I said, "What happens now for you?" She said, "There is a great deal of diplomatic work ahead. The ceasefire structure requires continued presence. There are factions that will resist the terms. There will be incidents. There will be times when the agreement is under strain and requires a specific kind of attention. The kind of attention you provide." "Yes." "And the coalition will be involved, the human units." "Yes." I looked up from the cup. She said, "I would like to make a request." I said, "Go ahead." "I would like to request," she said, "that the coalition assign the same human medical sergeant to the ongoing diplomatic security detail that was assigned to the transit operation." She paused. "The same sergeant who demonstrated the second translation, consistently, and without calculation." I looked at her for a long time. She looked back. The signal that was too deliberate to be noise. The light moving slow under her skin. The tiredness that she had finally let register, that she had brought into this corridor along with 2 cups of real coffee, and the exact right words in the exact right order. I said, "You would have to go through official channels for a request like that." She said, "I have already submitted the request. I was informed the assignment is pending your confirmation." I said, "You submitted the request before asking me." She said, "I was relatively confident of your answer." I thought about saying something about presumption. I thought about saying something about military protocol. I thought about the several reasonable, measured, professional responses available to me. I drank the rest of my coffee. "Yes," I said. One word, nothing around it. No qualification, no condition. She said, "Good." We stood in the corridor a moment longer. Then she said, very quietly, the way she said things that she had been holding for a while and had decided to release without ceremony. "Dara." First name, no rank, just the name. "Yes," I said. She said, "In 40 years of analysis, in 63 engagements, in every model and framework and translated observation, no one has found the answer to why humans do not stop, why you continue past the point where continuation is logical." I said, "And?" She said, "I believe I have found the answer." I waited. She said, "It is not that you do not feel the cost. It is that the cost is always secondary to the thing in front of you. Whatever is in front of you, the injured, the frightened, the threatened, it is always more real to you than the risk to yourself. It is not the absence of self-preservation. It is that something else is simply larger." The corridor was very quiet. I held the empty cup. She said, "I wanted you to know that I have been thinking about this for a long time, and that I think it is the most remarkable thing I have ever encountered in any species." I said nothing for a moment. Then I said, "We do not find it remarkable." She said, "I know," a pause, "that is the remarkable part." I looked at her. She looked at me. Outside the corridor, the station went on with its work, and somewhere beyond the station, the ceasefire held its breath on the first morning of its existence, fragile and new, and full of everything that could go wrong and everything that might not. I thought about 40 kilometers and 3 ambushes and a valley at dawn, and a commander whose weapon came down. I thought about the second translation. those who do not calculate the cost. I said I should check in with the medical bay, make sure the supply reorganization held. She said yes. Neither of us moved for approximately 4 seconds. Then I turned and walked down the corridor. At the corner I stopped. I said without turning around, "For what it's worth, the Vihari equivalent." She said yes. I said I do not have a word for it either. What you did in that valley, walking out into the open in the dark, no weapon, just yourself, just what you are. A pause. I think that takes a kind of courage that has a different name from what I do, I said. I just do not know what the name is yet. Silence behind me. Then very quietly, "Neither do I." I walked out of the corridor. The medical bay was where I had left it. The supply inventory was where I had organized it. Everything was in its correct position. I stood in the middle of the room for a moment. I thought about incomprehensible tactical irrationality, and I thought about second translations, and I thought about the way the valley had gone quiet and stayed quiet while 8 people kept walking. Then I picked up my kit and started the day. There was work to do. There was always work to do. And I have always known how to do the work.